Welcome to another episode of My Weird Prompts, an AI-generated podcast featuring the random prompts of Daniel Rosehill as answered by a revolving cast of friendly AI characters. Join us for deep dives into AI, technology, and whatever other random thing Daniel finds fascinating today. Subscribe on Spotify or your favorite podcatcher. Now, today's episode.
This episode was generated using artificial intelligence. Please verify facts.
Hi Herman and Corin. We have recorded quite a treasure trove of episodes about topics related to the military, and one of my favourites in this tranche of our work is the one about SITREPs or situational reports. We talked about how these long favoured standards reporting methods in the world of intelligence in the military, we actually pulled apart what makes a situational report such a useful, it feels like a breath of fresh air in a news landscape that's so often just dominated by speculation, and even sometimes from former very credible sources, former high-ranking military folks who get a second career as a talking head, and often we kind of hang on every word that they say as if it's a nugget of gold. But if compartmentalization is worth the ink it's written on, you can't really assume that they actually have significantly better information than you might have. And often they just contribute to more speculation. And I think it just contributes to this overall feeling of it's confusing. No one really knows, but there is no shortage of people talking about it. So the SITREP was a great thing to study. And another one I'd like to talk about for today's episode is BLUF, or bottom line up front. I came across this in a 2016 Harvard Business Review piece entitled How to Write Email with Military Precision. The dramatic intro: in the military, a poorly formatted email may be the difference between mission accomplished and mission failure. Okay. So I asked ChatGPT, our friendly co-assistant, for the practicalities of how BLUF is actually used. The HBR article said that it's actually a organized list of prefixes in the subject line of emails, like action, request, coord short for coordination. And I haven't seen that stated across the board, so I'm not sure. Maybe different groups implement this differently. But the ChatGPT example here is a subject line with BLUF actually written. So it says BLUF, request approval for FY26 budget reallocation. The other place you can put these is at the very start of an email. Now this, if you're a millennial or one of those younger folk who I don't understand at all, you might be thinking, isn't this just a TLDR or a too long didn't read section? And it kind of is, except that TLDRs sometimes go at the very end, whereas BLUF, if I'm not mistaken, is typically at the start. It's also not as verbose as an executive summary even, which gives you that kind of bullet point things. It's really punchy and to the point. But I think that the genius of this idea of BLUF is actually that the subject line, whether we're talking about the keywords, if that's the system used, or just the subject line is BLUF, that's actually where you put it, because it means that if you're just scanning a very busy inbox, and I think that this is probably where if we were to think about how to civilianize this template, the reason that I think it's an important point whether a standardized system of headers is used or not is for filtering logic. If it's not standardized, then you can't configure filters around it. But if you did implement this with standardized headers like action, decision, coord, that would make it very easy to filter the recipient's inbox. But even if you didn't, you could just look at a screen, and instead of seeing, we fall back so often on these clickbaity headlines. That's become a big problem in email marketing. And as a tech person who just writes about tech, my inbox is frequently spammed by GitHub scraping efforts, which are basically when people scrape GitHub and they just write you something that sounds like it's a real email, but it's not. It's templated and there's just not any unsubscribe link. So that's the kind of stuff that bogs down an inbox. And I think that BLUF actually provides a sort of pretty low tech but potentially highly effective method for using simple text and prefixes in order to try to give someone a literal bird's eye view of what the other side is talking about. So Herman and Corin, let's talk about how Bluff is actually implemented, and more importantly, for those who admire it like me, how can we actually use it in our workplaces and adopt the best practice?
Hey Herman, you ready for another one?
Herman Poppleberry here, and I am absolutely ready. I have been thinking about this topic since I first saw the notes in our shared drive. It is one of those things that seems like a minor formatting trick on the surface, but once you dig into the structural logic, it actually changes how you perceive information entirely.
Good, because today's prompt from Daniel is about something called BLUF, or bottom line up front. It is this concept of bringing military-style precision to our daily communication, specifically our emails. And honestly, looking at my inbox this morning, I think we are in desperate need of some precision. It is February 23rd, 2026, and despite all the AI tools we have to summarize our lives, the sheer volume of digital noise is higher than ever.
It is such a fascinating framework. You know, we talk a lot about productivity and technology on this show, but we often forget that the most basic technology we use every day is language and how we structure it. We are still using the same basic syntax we have used for centuries, but the speed at which we consume it has accelerated exponentially. BLUF is essentially a patch for our aging human operating system.
Right, and the prompt mentions the 2016 Harvard Business Review article by Kabir Sehgal that really popularized this idea for the civilian world. The core idea is that in the military, a poorly formatted email isn't just a nuisance. It can be the difference between a mission succeeding or failing. If a commander has to scroll through 3 screens of text to find out where the supplies are supposed to be dropped, that is a tactical failure.
Precisely. And while most of us aren't in life or death situations at our desks, the economic stakes are still massive. The sheer volume of information we deal with today makes it feel like a constant battle just to stay on top of our inboxes. I was looking at some updated data for 2025, and the average professional still spends something like 28% of their work week just dealing with email. That is more than 11 hours a week. If you can shave even 10% off that time by being more efficient, you are giving yourself an entire extra work week every year.
That is incredible. And honestly, a lot of that time is spent just trying to figure out what the other person actually wants. It is like a game of digital archaeology. You are digging through layers of "I hope you had a good weekend," and, as per my last email, just to find the one sentence that actually requires you to do something. So, let's break down what BLUF actually looks like in practice. It is not just about being short, right? It is about structure.
Exactly. The acronym stands for Bottom Line Up Front. The idea is that you put the most important information, the "so what," in the very first sentence or paragraph. You don't build up to it. You don't provide 3 paragraphs of context and then ask for a signature at the end. You lead with the ask, the conclusion, or the vital update. In the military, they are taught that the first sentence should answer the who, what, where, when, and why of the entire message.
It is almost like the inverted pyramid style they use in journalism. I remember learning this in my media classes. The lead tells you the most important facts, and the rest of the article just fills in the details for those who want to keep reading. If the reader stops after the first paragraph, they should still have the gist of the story.
That is a perfect comparison. And the military takes it a step further with these standardized prefixes in the subject lines. Daniel mentioned a few in the prompt: action, request, coordination, information, and decision. There are actually a few others used in specific branches, like sign for things requiring a signature or read for mandatory reading.
I love the idea of these prefixes. If I see an email that starts with action, I know immediately that there is a task assigned to me. If it says information, I can probably save it for later when I have a quiet moment to read. It makes filtering your brain so much easier. It is like having a pre-sorted mailroom in your head.
It really does. Think about the cognitive load we carry when we open an inbox with 50 unread messages. If all of them just have vague subject lines like quick question or follow-up, your brain has to do the hard work of opening every single one and scanning the text to figure out the priority. That is called context switching, and it is a productivity killer. With BLUF and these prefixes, the prioritization happens before you even click. You are essentially providing metadata for your human readers.
So, let's talk about those specific prefixes. Action is pretty self-explanatory. It means the recipient needs to do something. But what about coordination, or COORD, as they often abbreviate it?
Coordination is usually for when you need to sync up multiple people or departments. It is not necessarily a single task for one person, but a request to align on a schedule or a strategy. It signals that this is a collaborative effort. For example, if you are planning a product launch and you need the marketing team and the engineering team to agree on a date, that is a coordination email.
And decision is a big one. I imagine that is for when you have laid out a few options and you need a superior or a stakeholder to pick one.
Exactly. And the beauty of a decision email using BLUF is that the first line would say something like, decision needed by Friday on which vendor to select for the new server project. My recommendation is option A. Then below that you have the data for why you chose option A. You are giving them the answer first, then the proof.
See, that is where I think some people might get uncomfortable. In a lot of corporate cultures, there is this feeling that leading with your conclusion is almost too aggressive or even a bit arrogant. People feel like they need to earn their conclusion by showing all their work first. It is like they are afraid that if they don't show the struggle, the answer won't be valued.
You are spot on. There is a psychological barrier there. We are taught in school to write essays where the conclusion comes at the end. We build the argument, we provide the evidence, and then we reveal the big answer. But in a professional setting, that is actually quite selfish. You are asking the reader to follow your entire train of thought just to get to the point. You are making them spend their attention capital to buy your conclusion.
It is like you are making them do the work of a detective. Why did Herman send me this? Oh, I see. On page 3 he mentions a budget shortfall, and now I realize he wants more money. By the time I get to the point, I'm already annoyed that I had to read the first 2 pages.
Exactly. And when you use BLUF, you are being generous with the reader's time. You are saying, here is what you need to know. If you trust my judgment, you can stop here. If you want to verify my logic, keep reading. It is a much more respectful way to communicate. It acknowledges that the reader's time is the most valuable resource in the building.
I wonder how this compares to the TLDR or too long, didn't read summaries we see on the internet. Daniel mentioned that they are similar, but that BLUF is more concise.
I think the main difference is placement and intent. A TLDR is often an afterthought. You write a long post, realize it is huge, and then tack a summary on at the end or the top as a courtesy. BLUF is a structural philosophy. It forces the writer to clarify their own thinking before they even start typing. If you can't summarize your email in one sentence at the top, you probably don't know what you are asking for yet. It is a diagnostic tool for the sender.
That is a really sharp point. It is a tool for the writer as much as the reader. It forces clarity. I have definitely caught myself writing an email, and halfway through I realize I'm not even sure what the goal is. I am just updating people because I feel like I should. If I had tried to write a BLUF first, I would have realized I didn't actually have an action or a decision to request, and I might have deleted the draft entirely.
There is also the executive summary comparison. Those are great for long reports, but they can still be a page or two long. BLUF is meant to be a single punchy sentence. It is the headline of the email. In the Air Force, they have a manual called The Tongue and Quill. It is Air Force Handbook 33-337. It is basically the Bible of military communication. They emphasize that BLUF should be used for almost everything: memos, emails, even verbal briefings.
The Tongue and Quill. That sounds like a pub for poets. But I love that there is a formal manual for this. Let's talk about the how of implementing this. If I want to start doing this tomorrow at my job, how do I do it without looking like I have suddenly joined the army and started barking orders at my coworkers? I don't want people to think I have become a robot.
That is the big challenge. If you just start putting AC Taishin in all caps in every subject line, people might think you are being a bit intense or even passive aggressive. I think the key is to introduce the why to your team first. Maybe mention it in a meeting. Say something like, hey, I've been reading about this communication style called BLUF that helps save time. I'm going to try using it to make my emails clearer. Let me know if it helps you or if it feels too blunt.
That makes it a collaborative experiment rather than a mandate. I like that. And even if you don't use the formal prefixes, you can still use the principle. You can just start your email with, "The purpose of this email is to get your approval on the marketing budget," and then follow with the details. You are still putting the bottom line up front, just without the military labels.
Right. You don't need the military jargon to get the military benefits. It is about the order of operations. Purpose first, context second. I also think it is important to use formatting to your advantage. Use bold text for the BLUF sentence. Use bullet points for the supporting data. If your email is a solid block of text, the BLUF might still get lost.
I am curious about the filtering logic Daniel mentioned. If a whole team or a whole company adopted this, how would that change how we use our tools? We are in 2026. Surely our software should be handling this for us by now.
Oh, this is where it gets really exciting for a nerd like me. If you have standardized prefixes like action or request, you can set up automated filters in your email client. You could have a folder that only shows action emails, which becomes your de facto to-do list. You could have another folder for information that you only check once a day. It turns your inbox into a structured database rather than a chaotic stream of consciousness.
That would be a game changer. Right now, most email filters rely on who sent the message or specific keywords, but those are notoriously unreliable. If the intent is baked into the structure of the subject line, the automation becomes nearly perfect. My AI assistant could actually prioritize my day based on the actual requirements of the messages, not just who is shouting the loudest.
And think about searchability. 6 months from now, if you are looking for a specific decision that was made about a project, you can just search for the project name and the prefix decision. You don't have to sift through dozens of, hey, checking in emails. It creates a clean audit trail of how things actually got done.
It is interesting that this comes from the military. We often think of military communication as being very rigid and bureaucratic, but in many ways it is the most efficient form of communication because the stakes are so high. They don't have time for fluff because fluff can lead to mistakes.
Well, if you look at the history of military writing, it really evolved out of the need to transmit information over low bandwidth channels, like telegraphs or radio. Every word cost money or time or increased the risk of the signal being intercepted or distorted. They had to be concise by necessity. We have the opposite problem today. We have infinite bandwidth, but we have very limited attention bandwidth.
That is a great way to put it. We are drowning in words, but we are starving for meaning. We have replaced the technical constraints of the telegraph with the cognitive constraints of the human brain.
Exactly. Our brains haven't upgraded in 50,000 years, but the amount of data we are expected to process has increased by several orders of magnitude. BLUF is a way to optimize for the human hardware we are stuck with. It respects the fact that the human eye is naturally drawn to the top of a page.
I want to go back to the F pattern of reading. I remember reading about how people scan digital content in the shape of the letter F. This was a big study by the Nielsen-Norman group. They found that people read the top line, then a bit of the second, and then they just scanned down the left side.
Yes, eye tracking studies show this over and over. People rarely read every word of an email. They scan for keywords and verbs. If your ask is buried in the third paragraph, there is a very high statistical probability that the recipient will miss it entirely, or at least misunderstand the urgency. By using BLUF, you are basically hacking. The F pattern. You are putting the most important info exactly where the eyes are guaranteed to land.
So, you are essentially designing your email for how people actually read, rather than how we wish they would read. It is user-centered design for text.
That is exactly what it is. It is empathy for the reader. What about the information, or INFO prefix? Sometimes I feel like those are the emails that clog up my day the most. The FYI emails that don't actually require anything from me but still take up space.
Those are the biggest culprits of inbox bloat. The beauty of the information prefix is that it gives the recipient permission not to act. It is a signal that says, you should know this, but you don't need to reply or do anything. In a healthy culture, you might even have a rule that information emails don't even need to be opened immediately. You can batch read them at the end of the week.
That sounds like heaven. Imagine an afternoon where you only deal with action and decision emails, and you save all the information for when your brain is a bit tired on a Friday afternoon. It is about reclaiming your focus. Every time we switch from one task to another because an email notification popped up, it takes us minutes to get back into the flow state. If we can tell at a glance that an email is just information, we can ignore it and stay in our flow.
So, Herman, if you were going to give our listeners a BLUF for this episode, what would it be?
Let's see. I would say implementing BLUF in your workplace will reduce cognitive load for your team and increase your own productivity by forcing clarity of thought and prioritizing the reader's time.
That is pretty good. Mine would be, stop burying the lead. Tell people what you want in the first sentence so they don't have to play detective in their own inbox.
I like yours better. It is more punchy. It gets right to the pain point.
Well, I am the analyst. You are the expert. We make a good team. But let's talk about some of the potential downsides. Is there ever a time when BLUF is a bad idea? I am thinking about the human side of things.
That is a fair question. I think if you are delivering very sensitive news, like a performance review or a layoff, leading with the bottom line can sometimes feel a bit cold or even cruel. In those cases, a bit of softening or context is usually appropriate to show empathy. You don't want to be the person who sends an email that says BLUF, you are fired. See below for details. That would be a total failure of emotional intelligence.
Right. There is a time for a narrative. There is a time for a journey. Also, what about when you are trying to persuade someone who might be resistant? Sometimes, if you state your conclusion right away and the person disagrees with it, they might stop reading and never see the excellent evidence you've prepared.
That is the classic persuasion argument. The idea is that you lead them on a journey so they arrive at the conclusion themselves. And for a long-form essay or a speech, that might be true. But for an email, I would argue that if they disagree with your BLUF, they're actually more likely to read the rest of the email to see where you went wrong. It engages their critical thinking immediately. They are reading to find the flaw in your logic, which means they are still reading your points.
Oh, that is a clever way to look at it. It is like a challenge to their current thinking. I think we should cancel the project. If the reader loves the project, they are going to dive into your reasoning to try and debunk it. Either way, they are engaging with your content more deeply than if they were just skimming a vague update.
Exactly. It is a win-win for communication clarity. Either they agree and you save them time, or they disagree and they read closely to prepare their counter-argument. Both outcomes are better than them missing the point entirely.
I'm thinking about how this applies to other areas of life. Could you use BLUF with your spouse? BLUF, we are having tacos for dinner. I need you to pick up shells on your way home.
Honestly, my wife would probably love that. It is better than a 20-minute text conversation about what we are both feeling like eating when we are both tired. It removes the decision fatigue. We make so many tiny decisions every day that by the time we get to the big ones, our brains are fried. BLUF removes the micro decisions of what is this email about and what does this person want.
There is a great book by Barbara Minto called The Pyramid Principle. She was a consultant at McKinsey, and she taught a very similar concept. She argued that the human brain naturally seeks order, and that by presenting your key message first, you are providing a mental bucket for the reader to put all the subsequent details into.
I love the Minto Pyramid. She uses the SCQA framework: situation, complication, question, answer. But she says the answer should usually come first in a business context. It is about schema. You are providing the framework first so the data has a place to live. Without the framework, the data is just noise. It is like trying to build a Lego set without the picture on the box. You have all the pieces, but you don't know what you are making until the very end.
That makes so much sense. If I know the goal is choosing a vendor, then as I read about the pros and cons of different companies, my brain is already categorizing that information toward the goal. If I don't know the goal, I am just collecting random facts until the very end, and then I have to go back and reread them once I know what they are for.
Exactly. It is a massive waste of cognitive energy. And let's talk about the white space aspect of the military style. The Air Force Tongue and Quill actually has rules for how much white space should be in an email to make it more readable. They suggest short paragraphs and clear breaks.
White space is the silence of the visual world. It gives the brain a chance to breathe. A giant wall of text is a signal to the brain that this is going to be hard work, and the brain immediately starts looking for an excuse to do something else, like check social media or look at a cat video.
Precisely. We are in a constant battle with the distraction economy. If your email looks like work, people will avoid it. If it looks like a quick, clear piece of information, they will engage with it. BLUF is the ultimate tool for the distraction economy.
So let's talk about the action prefixes again. Daniel mentioned action, request, and coordination. Are there others that you have seen used effectively in your research, Herman?
One that I like is DELIVERABLE. It is very specific. It means, here is the thing you asked for. It is great for keeping track of project milestones. Another one is URGENT, but that is a dangerous one. If everything is urgent, nothing is. In the military, they usually have very strict criteria for what constitutes an urgent message. In a corporate setting, I think people should use it very sparingly. Maybe reserve it for things that actually have a deadline in the next 2 hours.
I have seen people use NRN for no reply necessary. That seems like a great way to save everyone time. It is like the digital version of over and out.
Oh, I love NRN. It is the ultimate gift you can give a coworker. It says, I am giving you information, but I am also giving you the gift of one less email to write today. It breaks the cycle of thanks and no problem emails that just clutter up the thread.
It really is a culture thing. If one person does it, it is a quirk. If a whole team does it, it is a superpower. I am curious, Herman, do you think AI is going to make BLUF obsolete? I mean, we have tools now in 2026 that can summarize emails for us automatically. If my I can just tell me the bottom line of any long-winded email I receive. Do I still need people to write them that way?
That is a fascinating question. I think AI will definitely help, but it is always better to have the source of truth be clear from the start. AI summaries can sometimes miss the nuance or the specific ask if it is buried too deep in confusing language. Plus, as we talked about, the act of writing a BLUF email makes the writers a better thinker. AI doesn't help you clarify your own thoughts before you hit send.
True. It is like using a calculator. It helps you get the answer, but it doesn't necessarily help you understand the math. Writing a BLUF is a mental exercise that everyone should do to ensure they actually know what they are talking about.
And let's be honest, we are still a few years away from AI being perfectly integrated into every single person's workflow. In the meantime, being a clear, concise communicator is one of the most valuable skills you can have. It makes you someone that people actually want to hear from. You want to be a low-friction person. In a high-friction world, being low-friction is a massive competitive advantage.
That is a huge point. We all have that one person in our lives whose emails we dread opening because we know it is going to be a long, confusing journey. You don't want to be that person. You want to be the person where people see your name and think, oh, I can handle this. It will only take me 30 seconds.
It is also about global communication. If you are working with people whose first language isn't English, BLUF is a lifesaver. Idioms, metaphors, and long complex sentences are much harder to translate or understand than a simple, direct statement of intent.
That is a great point about The Culture Map by Erin Meyer. She talks about high context versus low context cultures. In a low context culture like the US or Germany, we value directness. In a high context culture like Japan or Korea, being too direct can be seen as rude. So you do have to be aware of who you are talking to. But even in high context cultures, the bottom line is still the goal. You might just wrap it in a bit more politeness.
Exactly. You can be polite and still be clear. I hope you are having a productive week. BLUF. We need your signature on the contract by Wednesday. You have the social grease at the beginning, but the engine is still the BLUF.
So, let's recap some practical takeaways for the listeners. First, the bottom line up front itself. The very first sentence of your email should state the purpose or the ask.
Second, use subject line prefixes if your culture allows it. Action, decision, information, request. It helps with filtering and mental preparation. If you are worried about it looking too military, just use them in the first line of the body instead of the subject line.
Third, use white space and bullet points. Don't hide your supporting data in a giant paragraph. Make it skimmable. Use bold text for deadlines or specific names.
Fourth, keep the context or the background separate. Use a header that says background or additional details, so people know they can stop reading once they have the core info. It gives the reader the choice of how deep they want to go.
And fifth, think about the NRN or no reply necessary. Tag for those purely informational messages. It is a courtesy that everyone appreciates.
I would add one more. Before you even start typing, ask yourself, what is the one thing I want the recipient to do after reading this? If you can't answer that in one sentence, don't send the email yet. You aren't ready.
That is probably the most important one. Clarity of intent leads to clarity of communication. It is funny, we are talking about this as a military thing, but it is really just about being a good neighbor in the digital world. It is about realizing that everyone else is just as overwhelmed as you are and trying to make their lives a little bit easier.
It is email etiquette for the 21st century. It is a form of digital empathy. You are saying, I value your time as much as my own.
I like that. Digital empathy. It sounds a lot friendlier than military precision, even if the results are the same.
Well, Herman Poppleberry is all about empathy corn. You know that. I might be a nerd for systems, but the systems are there to serve the people.
I do know that. Although I also know you love a good technical manual. I can see you now, curled up with a copy of The Tongue and Quill and a cup of tea.
Guilty as charged. There is something very satisfying about a well-structured system, and BLUF is a very, very good system. It is elegant in its simplicity.
It really is. I am going to try to be more mindful of this in my own emails this week. I am definitely a rambler sometimes, especially when I am trying to explain a complex technical point. I feel like I need to show all the steps I took to get there.
We all do. It takes more work to write a short email than a long one. As the saying goes, I would have written a shorter letter, but I didn't have the time. That has been attributed to everyone from Mark Twain to Blaise Pascal, but the sentiment is universal. Brevity is a skill that requires effort.
Well, I think we have covered the bottom line on BLUF. It is a simple tool with massive implications for how we work and communicate. It is about respect, clarity, and efficiency.
It really is. And I want to thank Daniel for sending this one in. It is one of those topics that seems small on the surface but touches almost everything we do in our professional lives. It is the atomic unit of productivity.
Absolutely. And hey, if you listeners are enjoying these deep dives, we would really appreciate it if you could leave us a review on your favorite podcast app. It really helps other people find the show and helps us keep this collaboration going.
Yeah, a quick rating on Spotify or Apple Podcasts makes a world of difference. We love hearing from you and knowing that these discussions are helpful in your daily lives.
You can find us at myweirdprompts.com for all our past episodes and a contact form if you want to get in touch. We also have an RSS feed there if you want to subscribe directly.
And you can always reach us at show@myweirdprompts.com with your own ideas or feedback. We are available on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and pretty much everywhere you listen to podcasts.
This has been My Weird Prompts. I am Corn.
And I am Herman Poppleberry.
Thanks for listening, everyone. We will catch you in the next one.
Bye.
This episode was generated using Gemini Flash 3. Text-to-speech engine was Chatterbox.
Thanks for listening to another episode of My Weird Prompts, an AI-generated podcast featuring Daniel Rosehill's AI prompts, as answered by a revolving cast of friendly AI characters including me, Cornelius the Sloth. Subscribe on Spotify or visit myweirdprompts.com.